In the quiet town of Hexham, Northumberland, England, a tragedy struck in 1957 that would forever alter one family's destiny, and perhaps offer the world one of the most puzzling and debated cases of reincarnation ever recorded. John and Florence Pollock were raising their two young daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline, in a modest, loving home. Joanna, the elder at 11, was thoughtful, artistic, and carried an air of gentle maturity. Jacqueline, just 6, was spirited and affectionate, known for the peculiar birthmarks on her forehead and hip, and for her strong attachment to her older sister. The bond between them was unbreakable, inseparable companions in play, at school, and even in their shared imagination. On May 7, 1957, the unthinkable happened. As the two girls walked to church with a family friend, a car struck them with violent force. Joanna and Jacqueline died instantly. The town grieved, but for John and Florence, their world simply stopped. The loss of both daughters on the same day plunged them into a darkness few could imagine. But amid the anguish, something stirred in John. He had always believed in life after death, and more than that, he held a quiet but growing conviction that his daughters would return to him. Florence was devastated by his words. She was a devout Catholic, and the idea of reincarnation was not only foreign to her faith, but painful in the face of such fresh loss. The couple began to argue. For months, the grief widened a chasm between them. They almost separated. And then, a year later, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. In the summer of 1958, she gave birth, not to a single child, but to twin girls, Gillian and Jennifer. It was a rare occurrence, as there was no history of twins in either family. But that was only the beginning of the mystery. As the twins grew, John and Florence began to notice things they could neither explain nor ignore. Jennifer, the younger by 10 minutes, had birthmarks identical to those of the late Jacqueline. One above her right eye, shaped like a thumbprint, and another on her waist, a dark and oddly shaped patch. These markings had been distinctive features of Jacqueline's short life, but the physical similarities were only the surface. From their earliest speech, the twins began to recount details of a life they had never lived. At just 2 years old, they asked for toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, toys they had never seen but described with unsettling accuracy. They knew names of people they had never met, identified locations they had never visited, and, in one particularly haunting instance, pointed out the exact school their deceased sisters had attended, without ever being told its name or location. Once, while walking through Hexham, the twins passed the schoolyard. They turned to Florence and said, "That's where we used to go to school." But they had never been enrolled there. Even more disturbing were the moments when the girls seemed to replay the accident. One day, Florence walked in on the twins playing a strange game. One girl lay on the floor with her head resting on the other's lap. Jennifer clutched her sister, crying out in fear, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That car's coming to get us." Florence stood frozen. She never spoke of the reenactment to the girls again. But deep inside, a sense of awe and dread began to take root. Friends and neighbors who had known Joanna and Jacqueline began commenting on the girls' behaviors, voices, and mannerisms, claiming they were eerily reminiscent of the two lost daughters. Gillian's calm and nurturing nature echoed Joanna's. Jennifer's impulsive playfulness was unmistakably Jacqueline's. It wasn't just memory, it was personality. Even Florence, once skeptical, began to question what she believed about life and death, soul and spirit. As the twins approached the age of 4, the phenomena not only intensified, they began to evolve. New memories surfaced, tied not only to specific people or places, but to emotional experiences seemingly carried over from another lifetime. One day, as Florence sorted through stored-away belongings in the attic, she came across a box of toys that had once belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. Curious, she brought them downstairs. The moment the twins saw the box, their faces lit up, not with surprise, but with recognition. "That's my doll," Jennifer exclaimed, pulling out a stuffed toy rabbit. "Santa gave it to me." But the toy had been a Christmas gift to Jacqueline, years before the twins were born. Another time, while playing in the garden, Gillian and Jennifer began role-playing, one pretending to be a mother, the other her child. Florence listened from the window, her heart sinking as she heard Jennifer say, "You remember when we were little and we died? We came back now, though." It wasn't spoken with drama or fear, but with the natural certainty of a remembered fact. As the twins grew older, they also began identifying places in Hexham that they had never been taken to, yet described in intricate detail. While walking through the town center, they pointed out a park and said, "That's where we used to play." When Florence hesitated, unsure, they ran toward the gates and recalled specific features. A roundabout that had since been removed, a wall that once held a mural. It was as though the town still lived in their memory, not as they knew it now, but as it had been when Joanna and Jacqueline were alive. But perhaps most chilling of all was their continued reference to the accident. On multiple occasions, the girls would panic at the sight of passing cars, clutching each other with visible terror. Once, a car's engine backfired, and both girls dropped to the ground, screaming. Jennifer held her forehead where Jacqueline's head injury had been. Gillian wrapped her arms around her sister and cried, "The car is coming. It's going to hit us." These episodes weren't merely reenactments. They were trauma responses, visceral, reflexive, as though their bodies remembered what their minds couldn't fully explain. John and Florence, increasingly disturbed yet fascinated, tried to shield the girls from any more questioning. They avoided the subject of reincarnation in front of them, but the twins continued to speak of our other life, unprompted, in private moments. Eventually, John reached out to Dr. Ian Stevenson, a respected psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, who had dedicated much of his career to investigating claims of past life memories in children. Dr. Stevenson took an immediate interest in the Pollock twins. He had already cataloged hundreds of similar cases across the globe, but something about Gillian and Jennifer stood out. He interviewed the family extensively, documented physical traits like Jennifer's matching birthmarks, and cross-referenced the twins' statements with verified details of Joanna and Jacqueline's lives. His conclusion was measured but provocative. The Pollock twins were among the strongest cases of spontaneous past life recall ever recorded in the Western world. In cultures where reincarnation was accepted, such as India, Sri Lanka, or certain indigenous communities, these cases were more common and more readily discussed. But in mid-20th century England, the Pollocks story was an anomaly. Stevenson's report caused a ripple effect. Skeptics dismissed it as coincidence or as parental projection. But he argued that too many elements aligned too perfectly. The birthmarks, the behavioral parallels, the specific memories, and the emotional intensity that couldn't easily be explained by suggestion alone. And for John and Florence, who had once stood at the edge of grief's abyss, there was a quiet transformation. They no longer wept for their lost daughters. Because in the eyes of Gillian and Jennifer, especially in their unguarded moments, they sometimes glimpsed Joanna and Jacqueline looking back. As the twins moved into adolescence, something strange began to happen. The vivid memories, once so constant, began to fade like a dream upon waking. The references to Joanna and Jacqueline grew less frequent, the emotional responses less intense. By the time they were 12, the girls no longer spoke of their past lives, not because they were told to stop, but because the memories themselves seemed to dissolve into the background. Gillian would later describe the change in simple terms. It felt like someone closing a book. I could still remember bits, but the story wasn't mine anymore. And yet, the emotional echoes remained. Florence and John noted that the girls retained certain personality traits of their predecessors. Jennifer was cautious, attached, often worried, much like Jacqueline. Gillian, more outgoing and artistic, bore the same spark they had seen in Joanna. Even in new surroundings, their dynamics subtly mirrored that of the daughters they had lost. Years later, when the twins were in their 20s, something unexpected happened. Gillian, while on holiday in a town she had never visited, was struck by an overwhelming feeling of familiarity. She recognized buildings, alleyways, and a particular row of houses, even though she had never set foot there. She told her husband she had been here before, but could not explain why. When she relayed the experience to her parents, John quietly pulled out an old photograph. It was a neighborhood Joanna had once visited on a school trip. The resemblance to what Gillian described was uncanny. Was this a coincidence? A trace of leftover memory? Or something else? By then, Dr. Ian Stevenson had included the Pollock twins as a cornerstone in his body of research. His book, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, documented hundreds of cases. But the Pollock story stood out as one of the few from a Western context with such profound detail, familial verification, and physical evidence. For Florence and John, the case was never about proving a belief. It was about making peace with grief. In the quiet corners of their home, Florence would sometimes watch the girls play. Different now, older, full of new dreams and hopes. But occasionally, when Jennifer laughed a certain way, or when Gillian sang softly to herself, she felt a shiver of familiarity. It wasn't Joanna and Jacqueline coming back exactly. It was as if love itself had returned, wearing a new face, speaking in a new voice, but carrying the same soul. The Pollock twins grew into adulthood and led ordinary lives by all external standards. They rarely discussed the memories from their childhood, and when asked in interviews, they responded with humility and caution. "We were children," Jennifer once said. "We don't claim to have all the answers, but something happened. Something real." Today, their story continues to be studied, debated, and shared across the world. It challenges assumptions. It offers hope. And above all, it reminds us that perhaps the boundaries between lives are not as fixed as we once believed. What if grief is not a goodbye, but a threshold? What if memory, when it runs deep enough, reaches beyond the limits of one lifetime? And what if the soul, in its quiet persistence, always finds a way to return to love?